Then, which legion did you belong to? You didn't belong to any legion. You were never assigned to one, right? But what lineage, what primarch was your genetic progenitor? My father was Neo, my mother was Erda. I was among the first. The first reference to the Horus heresy was in 1988. The story goes that Games Workshop was designing a new board game, Adeptus Titanicus, but they only had enough money to design and create an army, so they called it Civil War and wrote some lore to back it up. This lore was expanded slightly later, and today we have a series of 64 books, along with a large amount of literature covering the conflict, which is quite common in Warhammer 40k. In fact, there are many ways in which the lore was influenced by things that happen in the games, or even just by the models. My favorite example of this is undoubtedly this guy, the first Imperial Space Marine, released in 1985 as part of a limited edition line. So this Space Marine is technically older than the first edition of Warhammer 40k. What a fantastic fact for your next Warhammer pub quiz. The author, Dan Abnett, clearly thought it was interesting because he decided to take this Space Marine and introduce him as a character in the Siege of Terra. Of course, he didn't call him Imperial Space Marine, but called him Lu, and in the novels he is often called L. And this is where, in my opinion, things get really crazy, because right now I'm sure you're thinking, how nice, what a detail on the part of Dan Abnett to include in a book a fun in-universe reference to a really old Warhammer model. But the thing is that this Space Marine is now one of the most important characters in the entire Warhammer 40k universe. He is a Space Marine without a Primarch. His father was the Emperor, but he rebelled against him, and then against Horus, and against the four gods of chaos, and he survived. Today we're going to review his story. El may not have a Primarch, but he does have a mother. Erda was a perpetual, an immortal almost impossible to kill. Her psychic abilities were perhaps unmatched among all her kin, except for one, the Emperor of Humanity. But she had known him long before he took that title. She knew him by the name of Neo. They met at the time of the First Cities, when he was nothing more than a warlord, like so many others of his kind, and had assumed responsibility for the tutelage of the human race and guiding its destiny. They worked together for millennia, and not only was his genius in genetics what made her an indispensable ally, but she was part of the foundations on which some of his grandest plans would arise. The Master of Humanity needed 20 children, 20 Primarchs, each to lead a legion of Space Marines, and to create his demigods he needed a genetic pool rare enough to mix with his own. Thus, as the Emperor is the father of the Primarchs, Erda is their mother. However, before the Master of Humanity could realize his vision of the Space Marine legions, he needed a prototype, a temporary template. It was not just about creating a powerful warrior, but about achieving genetic stability, something that the precursors of the Space Marines, the Thunder Warriors, lacked. So, working alongside Erda and a team of scientists, the Emperor created L. The exact number of Proto-Space Marines remains unclear in the lore. The serial code LE2 suggests that there may have been at least one other, and L mentions that he was one of the first, but he never talks about any brother, and the Emperor refers to L as the reference prototype, since it was created before the genes of the Primarchs were merged. L does not belong to any legion, but considers the Emperor as his father and Erda as his mother. At the time of the creation of the Primarchs, a powerful rift was forming between their parents. Erda had felt insecure about his work for some time. The Emperor's power had grown enormously over the millennia, but so had his arrogance. He had started taking shortcuts, and all the Perpetuals, except her and Malkador, had abandoned him. Despite losing this group of immortals, with whom he had fought so hard for millennia, the Emperor was now happy to see them leave. He was tired of their objections and wary of their caution. He wanted results. However, Erda had stayed until they created her children, but then she discovered the full extent of the Emperor's plans. She was not allowed to influence the development of her sons, as the Emperor had prepared their destiny through her children. He would force the human race to advance into the future, subdue it, and challenge the warp to achieve it. He had built perpetual analogs and turned them into weapons, ready to resist the inflexible cosmos. He was planning a crusade to reclaim the stars and reclaim in a century or two what had taken millennia to lose. Erda walked away heartbroken, but not before committing a terrible act of rebellion. According to Erda, she created the warp vortex that scattered her children throughout the galaxy, despite believing that she was saving them. She contributed to the calamity that befell her species. Fearing the Emperor's wrath, she hid, but she could not go alone. El accompanied her, vowing to protect her. He protected her for centuries, waiting for the persecutors who were sure to come after them. To protect his mother, this solitary space marine was willing to face the new recruits of the Space Marines, the custodians, or even the Emperor himself if he came in search of revenge. However, no one appeared, and, eventually, El and Dirta realized that they were safe from the Emperor's wrath. No one knows why he forgave them, but he moved on, and the Great Crusade was underway. The Emperor claimed the stars and, one by one, found all of his sons. Meanwhile, Erder and his legionary would eventually return to Terra, but far from the Imperial Palace, in Morinia, located in the Pan-African Northwest, near the place where Aer was born. Although El did not participate in his father's Great Crusade, he was not without experience, as he had acted as his mother's guardian on her travels. And in one of those adventures, El even had the privilege of witnessing the beauty of the Alari dancers. As history well knows, the Great Crusade did not last long, and eventually, the galaxy was engulfed in the Horus Heresy. The heresy culminated in the siege of Terra, and the forces of War Master Horus, traitor son of the Emperor, attacked humanity's homeworld. It was then, while his sons were inflicting their horrors on his planet, that Erder received an unexpected visit, John Grammaticus. John was a powerful human psychic who for a time had served the enigmatic Cabal Zenus and had been endowed with the abilities of a perpetual, but his loyalty to the Zenus had waned, as had the gift they had granted him. There would be no turning back. The next time John died, Grammaticus would come to Terra with the goal of meeting Elenius. He was not just a perpetual, he was the oldest of them all. He had served as one of the Emperor's closest allies in the distant past, the first warm one, but like so many others, he also became disillusioned with the Emperor's vision of the future Emperor's vision of the future. They had all betrayed and turned their backs on their old friend John, and they had all agreed to meet on Terra, but finding no trace of all, John feared the worst. Desperate, he sought help to commit a murder, hoping she could guide him in those dangerous times. However, as he approached her house, he suddenly felt the cold, heavy barrel of an ancient bolt pistol pressed against the back of his neck. It was pointed at him by a figure in plate armor of the Adi Legion, and the figures wearing it were Ardi's Big and Estar's Bread. But the armor was colorless and had no markings, not even the bare gray of the wandering knights-errant, but was pale, with a bright silver finish like a lead ingot. L's armor was marked with a small strip stamped with the letters LE2 engraved just below the chest line. Both L and his pistol had a patina of antiquity impossible to fake. Jan realized that this space marine was clearly very old, so old that his weapon was an M67-6 Union model prior to Phobos Mark Zur, manufactured even before Mars joined the Empire, and that it had been given to L when you, the ATI, looked at John sternly in your piercing blue eyes. Why have you come to stop it all, Horus? You can't, of course you can't. It's the damn Horus, no one can. I am here to stop him because he is the only one who can end this abomination. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, even from a man who has spent his life making stupid decisions. How do you plan to stop him? That's why I need your help. El allowed John to ask Order for help, who agreed to help him and consulted several methods: the sun, the stars, the tarot cards, the red thread, and the black mirrors. They all agreed that Elon's person was not lost in space, but in time, 2 weeks from where they were. In addition to revealing this knowledge to John, Urder also gave it to El to act as his protector and help him find all the people before he left. However, El made one last promise to his mother. He would do everything possible to save his father and prevent the triumph of ruin. El and John searched for Elenius and eventually found him alongside a group of Cal survivors who were being harvested by the sons of. All and their companions were freed and joined forces with 2 new figures, a blind but powerful psychic named Act, and another space marine who identified himself as Hilarious and claimed to know a secret path to enter the Imperial Palace. These companions, whom John called the Argonauts, traveled to the heart of the Empire, the Imperial Sanctum, with the goal of confronting the Emperor of Humanity to discuss with him the course, purpose, and meaning of this terrible conflict that spanned the entire galaxy. Along the way, it was revealed that the space marine named Hilarious was Gok, the first captain of the Alpha Legion. Grammaticus neutralized him with a mental movement sensitive to discovering that he was actually under the control of the witch, and they were not sure of Act's intentions. Act confirmed to them that she was not working against them and that, in fact, she had been sent by order, but they could do nothing for Peak, who could barely move, and they left him behind under the Imperial Palace. However, the rest of the group continued on, and when they reached their target, they were met by a warrior of the Lyo Custodes and Vulcan, the pre-march of the Salamanders. The Argonauts were escorted to the throne room, but upon arriving they discovered that they had arrived too late. The Emperor was not there. Malater, the Sigillite, sat on the golden throne, and the Master of Humanity had departed to face his son along with Pre-March Rogaldorn, Pre-March Sanguinius, the Captain General of the Custodians, Constantine Valder, and the Pre-March of the Salamanders, Vulcan. Emperor was not there. Malater, the Sigwite, occupied the golden throne, and the Master of Humanity had left to face his son along with Primar Rogaldor, Primar Sanguinius, the Captain General of the Custodians Constantine Valder, and a horde of other heroes. This is known as the Anabasic Assault. When Horus Lapaca lowered the shields of his flagship, the vengeful spirit, for his father to face him, the Lord of Terror took the bait. The bait, with the Master of Humanity absent and Malater on the golden throne. Vone was now the highest authority on Terra. In a way, Vulcan is something of a brother to the Proto-Marine, and El treats his relative with great reverence, as Er deeply loved all his children. El learned many skills from his mother, including how to read the Imperial Tarot cards, and even had his own set, which Urdur had given him. The tarot cards are psychoactive crystal wafers that are rumored to have been originally created by the Emperor himself and are therefore imbued with a fragment of his power. If you know how to read them, in theory they can be used to divine the future. When the Argonauts were escorted to the throne room, many of their possessions were confiscated, including El's cards. When Vulcan reviews El's deck, he finds a card that shouldn't be there, the Dark King card. That card was not part of my deck. I have had the cards for years. They were a gift from my lover, and I know them all by heart. I had never seen that card before. It was not in my deck when I arrived here. For a brief instant, they felt they were going to be heard, but the moment passed, and they were taken to be imprisoned until the siege was over. However, these companions never reached the city walls. At this point in the Siege of Terror, the planet itself is sinking into the Imperium. Even the geography of the Imperial Palace is no longer stable. The traitors are inside the walls. In the midst of the confusion, the Argonauts escape and advance through a geography they cannot trust, but with the mission of finding and confronting the Emperor. However, amid the misfortunes of the Imperial Palace, they come face to face with the worst, the hand of destiny itself, the Dark Apostle Erebus Lu. This one charges against the bearer of the word, using an iron post as an improvised weapon, but Erebus pronounces a word of power that sends Lu flying backwards. The rest of the Argonauts attack, but they have no chance. Erebus kills most of them. John manages to nail some Allery. She's an Erebus ear, but suffers a fracture in his jaw and arm during the fight. Using his immense Sana, only Act is able to contain the Dark Apostle, but not for long. El grabs everyone and John before jumping from the battlement, at which point Act directs his power downwards and the wool explodes, being buried alive under the rubble. When El, John, and everyone else leave, they're no longer on the palace walls. They're not even really in terror. Horus has submerged the planet in the immaterial, and everything blurs. The terror, the vengeful spirit, the warp itself. In this new darkness focused on the heat, a new kingdom is created for Horus, a new city, his city, the inevitable city. The three companions have somehow passed into this kingdom, and here it almost seems as if all the cities that have existed have merged into one. Soon after, more of Lupa's soldiers find them. El tries to contain several bearers of the word, but outnumbered, he receives a sword in the ribs. It seems that the end has come for the legionaries of air, but then, out of nowhere, another transhuman warrior enters the fight, throws a power sword at El, and, back to back, they end the demented children of Logar. The newly arrived space marine is Gavio Lone, a beloved son of Worm himself, but who had remained loyal to the Emperor of Humanity. "I'm still a captain of the Luna Wolves," says Lon. "It's just that there are no Luna Wolves left. My father is Horus Lupac Kara. What will you do when you find him?" asks Z. "If he is still my father, I will beg him to give in and abandon the path he is following. If he is not, and I suspect he is not, I will avenge the brothers I have lost because of his will." All and Jayan had traveled far to get there. They had witnessed the depravity of the Emperor's sons. Sons of the Emperor, the madness of the bearers of the word, and even the torture of Mulder on the Golden Throne. But what they saw next was more terrible than any of them could have imagined. There, in the inevitable city, in the midst of apotheosis, the Dark King suddenly pounced on them. He was locked in an obsidian sphere, ready to emerge ascended as a new god of the warp, and his native fire would consume most of humanity, just as Slaanesh did with the Ari. Worst of all, as the Dark King approaches, they see the truth. The Dark King is not Horus Lupa, but the Emperor of Humanity. El Locan, Al, and Jan did not understand why the Emperor had done this. Even at the height of his arrogance, they never really believed that he sought to ascend as a god of the warp, but what they did not understand was that the Emperor felt he had no other option. Horus had deceived his father once the Anabasis assault was underway. The Master of War revealed his stratagem, and we see this through Maladder's perspective in the Golden Throne. You no longer have to hide. You no longer have to hide your power behind veils of secrecy and deception. If he had had the slightest idea of how strong you had become, he would never have dared to challenge you. So you wrapped yourself in a mantle of eternity, your presence, your thoughts, your soul, your power. You silenced your mind. You took refuge in the past, in memories, in eternal isolation, behind artificial masks of dementia and madness. You did not allow anything to betray you, because a single glimpse of your true self would have stopped him in his tracks and made him flee. Now there is no turning back. He is approaching, and you no longer have to hide. Get up, get rid of your masks and disguises, and show yourself as you are. It is liberating, intoxicating to those around you, your warriors and officers, your children, the other things that lurk and whisper. They scream in dismay to see you. The revelation of your new appearance is too magnificent for them. Their eyes burn. They collapse on the ground, crying, screaming, and soiling themselves. You're also a star. You're a tower of lightning. You're a king above kings. Do not underestimate the nature of the fight about to take place, the ultimate battle. It will be hard. It will be hard. Your old father is strong, but you are infinite. The trick of Horus had worked. He had convinced the Emperor of his madness by hiding his mind in the past, and, when his father came to him, he set a trap after teleporting to the vengeful spirit. The Emperor and his forces were scattered throughout the ship, and therefore, the inevitable city. The Emperor and some custodians emerged on boarding deck 8. This was the first sign to the Emperor that something had gone terribly wrong, since the vengeful spirit only had 6 vessels. They were in a realm created by Horus. It was then that Horus demonstrated to his father the true extent of his power. He twisted the minds of the Emperor's guardians. Blood flowed from the eyes of dozens of custodians, who screamed and attacked their lord. These warriors were as loved as any son, but due to the manipulations of the warp, their king of centuries was forced to give them his horrible mercy. Although the Master of Humanity was able to defeat his own warriors and preserve a few, he finally understood the true extent of his mistake. Horus had accumulated so much power that not even his father could face him. Unless the Emperor realized that he had chosen to face his son not as a man, but as something far greater. He drank deeply from the warp and extracted the power that had been unleashed against him. He stole it and gorged himself on it, just as he stole the fire in Molech. He will not be defeated. He will not be defeated. Even if chaos attacks the Emperor with unprecedented fury, unleashing its power in a condensed paroxysm of events in the history of humanity. He will not back down. He will face the excess of chaos with his own excess, pushing his power beyond any cautious restriction he previously respected. He has always been too resistant a conduit to tolerate the burning wire of immaterial forces crackling in his blood. He is trained to endure it for more than 30,000 years. He has conditioned himself to withstand its strength, to harness it, to use it, to inhale its fire and exhale it in the faces of the pantheon of chaos. They have opened the sunless sea of the Imperium to him, and, for that reason, he drinks from it to magnify his own almighty power. This is what the whole journey has been building to. The Emperor of humanity is about to make a terrible mistake in his determination to defeat his son. He has chosen to become something even worse, locked in the obsidian sphere. The Emperor is unable to communicate directly. Instead, he speaks through Kuda's dusk, the only surviving custodian of his contingent. Through his proconsul, the Emperor addresses his old friend Alenius, the person who must now persuade the Emperor to renounce the new power he has claimed and seek another way to defeat Horus. Because even if the Emperor could defeat his son, the warp will become a frenzied frenzy for millions of years. The material realm will be overcome and humanity annihilated. Unfortunately, the Lord of Terror is initially reluctant to accept this reasoning. He has always been so sure of himself, says L softly. K, with eyes reddened by blood, turns his gaze to the wounded legionary L2 and says, "You are not in a position to question the merits of my king's plan. You were created as part of him, the baseline prototype. An element of the plan cannot question the plan." In a last attempt to bring the Emperor to his senses, everything suggests that the master of humanity use his newly acquired abilities, those divine powers. Take a moment and examine the plan. Analyze its flaws. Use your divine perception to see the truth. The Dark King cannot be the solution. Following this advice, the Emperor finally agrees. The substance of creation shudders. Matter and the immaterial vibrate in shock. The power of the Dark King is expelled and dispersed, returning to the empire from where it came, taking with it Flume and Sum, the broken prophecies and the remains that brought it, and with them, the never-born wail en masse. His whispers turned against themselves, twisted into lies and falsehoods, and his future, so assured, suddenly became a lie. The curse of the Dark King passes from the material galaxy and returns to the seething coffins of myth, at least in this era. The despair of the demons is ephemeral, as the crystal spreads and begins to seal their fate. Their anguish turns to joy. They perceive another victory, not the one, but one they have longed for a long time. The fool of humanity, the triumph of ruin, the investiture of Horus Lupercal as imperial majesty. The union of chaos, divided into one, an unparalleled vessel, an end and a death in the epicenter of liberation. The figures stumble and fall in the searing flash of psychic power that erupts from the master of humanity. The light consumes them. Alenius Person, John Grammaticus, Gario alone, and L2 fall into the dust, blinded, while the shell of the black mirror of the sphere fractures and explodes. They fall into a fetal position, dragged by the avalanche of expelled power, just like K2's dusk, knocked to his knees, but the light does not kill them. In the last seconds of his divinity, the Emperor channels the force at his disposal. He does not do it out of sentimentality or charity. He needs allies. He needs every last man. He envelopes them in his aura and lets it protect them against the voracious psychic winds. He cradles them as gently as if they were eggshells in his palm. This is not how they are going to die. It is too late for the other sentinels. They cannot be brought back from death, but for the others, a last gift of life and renewal. The farewell gift of a deity who abdicates. They all awaken in the undulating dust, and discover that their countless aches and bruises have disappeared, that their fatigue has vanished, that their old uniform is clean and new, and their rifle gleams as when it was manufactured. Lon gets on his knees. The terrible burden of his visions has been mercifully diluted to return concentration to his tortured power. L's wound heals, the shad armor rebuilt. Jayan blinks and removes the bandages from a face that is no longer mutilated with a hand that is no longer useless. There is a widespread sensation of Osag Genya, the blessing of Emperor K2's. At sunset, the last Hetan stands up. Feet, his aquiline armor gleams, his bones have flesh again, and his flesh is restored. A brilliant seal shines on his breastplate. He turns and sees that where dunes used to sit, a black and painful sphere, now a lone figure stands, with his cape billowing in the wasteland wind, white dust swirling around him, a figure in golden armor, a king, his master, now a mere mortal. Divinity has faded, but he remains a being of perpetual power. The golden giant draws his war sword. The last battle is near, which brings us to the end of the first part of L's story. As you have seen, it is something fundamental in the entire Warhammer 40k scenario. The Emperor of Humanity, in a moment of desperation, was about to commit the biggest mistake of his life. He was about to ascend to become a god of the warp, a decision that would basically have ended humanity. Even Maladar, sitting on the golden throne, could see that the Emperor's actions were leading to a fate even more catastrophic than Horus's victory. Fortunately, thanks to the intervention of Locan and the remaining Argonauts, the Emperor was convinced that he was making a serious mistake. Elenius was the main driving force here. However, this highlights the importance of El, since he had to take a person to that place, and at that time, so that they could prevent the Emperor from making this terrible decision. As El survives this encounter, it means that he is technically one of the only people in the entire Empire who knows that the Emperor almost exterminated his entire race, and, furthermore, I think there is a good chance that El will appear in the future of the story, since it is hinted that the Dark King will return in the future. He will return in another era, and that era will most likely be the 42nd millennium. This whole scenario really highlights how much the Emperor of Humanity poses a threat to the gods of chaos, who generally hate the idea of someone else joining their pantheon and certainly detest the idea of someone essentially standing above them. But they are actually willing to accept the Emperor of Humanity as the Dark King, since it basically neutralizes the Emperor's threat in their eyes at this point in history, having spoken the truth to supreme power. John Leaf, at the Emperor's request, his story is not over yet, but for now they accede to his demand. However, K2's Dusk, the Hetan proconsul, Gary Olone, the Moon Wolf, and Lu, the Proto-Auras, remain before the Master of Humanity for what everyone presumes is a final oath. The threat of the Dark King may have disappeared, but Horus Luppel, champion of the ancient gods, is still alive, and all chaos is channeled through him. The Emperor has returned to his normal form of Golden Colossus and prepares to meet his son. The four warriors cross the ruined city in search of Horus Luppel, who, although no longer ascending to divinity, is still the master of humanity. The demons foolish enough to face him suffer Aziz-Ly. The Emperor can give the monsters true death, who will never see the light again or threaten his empire. And it is not only demons that stand in their way. Before the Emperor and his companions is a full company of word-bearers. "Weaken with them," says El. The comment is so impromptu, so frivolous, that it takes Locan by surprise, and he laughs with genuine amusement for the first time in years. "We can," says Cuss, but his voice is not his own. The Emperor takes a single step forward with an instantaneous movement and a rumble of weapons. The traitors move, raising their weapons in a profusion of pikes and polearms to face them. A loud pneumatic bang is heard, like the amplified spit of a nail gun, when the weapons of the siege dreadnought open fire. Dazzling rays of energy that destroy tanks streak across the slope and disappear. Lon feels the pain of the elevated psychics. He can almost see the wave of the M shield that the Emperor has raised as he is hit by the immense firepower. He hears the bang and hiss of the fire as it impacts against nothing and is neutralized. All the kinetic force is dispersed. All the thermal energy is radiated, and then the pain increases so sharply that Lon feels it in the sinus cavities of his head. His ears throb. The Emperor takes another step, raises his power claw, with his war sword low to one side. In the other hand, a dazzling voltaic energy accumulates that coils between the claws of his fingers, jumping like plasma ropes, and lets the accumulated ray shoot out from his raised hand, crossing the sky over the devastated wasteland and strikes the ground just before reaching the traitor mass. There is a flash of black body radiation, a thunder of violent gas pressure change, an ionized burst of electrical discharge as lances of energy are released. The struck ground burns, the struck ground breaks. The shock wave widens, propagating plasma fire that spreads towards the lines of the word-bearers, annihilating the ground and turning it into scrambled ashes and destroying the rows of warriors that are on it. They disintegrate one by one, shattered by the heat and fire thrown into the air. The melted armor plates and scorched weapons are fired from the destruction like debris that spreads smoking throughout the landscape. Nothing organic survives the wave of fire that sweeps the entire cohort. Unstoppable, it consumes everything, burning entire men as if they were twigs. The effigies melt, the ceramite ignites, and the flags burn wildly as they collapse and fall. The cataphractii melt like wax. The siege dreadnoughts, stubborn and defiant with their large armored bulk, burn with blue fire like launch capsules re-entering the atmosphere, and then burst one after another in titanic explosions when their explosive charge is triggered. When the glow fades and the pain subsides, there is nothing left but an acre or two of disturbed and blackened earth. Fragments of plates and segments of armor darkened by the heat cover the burned area, and the wasteland wind pushes the hot smoke sideways in a long white column. However, it is clear that the Emperor did not voluntarily renounce his divinity. He will not renounce his empire without a fight. The warriors find what they sought, the throne of the warm ones, the Lupal court. Upon entering, El gasps. There is no sign of Horus, but Sanguinius, the great angel of Ba, is dead. His brutally beaten body is now crucified on wool. Although the Emperor's companions struggle to contain their pain, even as they approach the lifeless body of the Primarch, Sanguinius' father remains impassive to their anguish. When he rejected the promise of divinity, he also cut off much of his emotional core, numbing himself to the pain that could otherwise be used as a weapon against him. Take him down, he orders Locan and K2s, who approach to release and carefully lower the angel's body. "Is he here?" asks Sel. Yes, he is. They hear his smile before seeing him, but Horus Lupal, 16th Primarch and warm champion of the Dark Gods, emerges from the shadows and tries to convince the master of humanity to submit and join his new empire. He has created a space for the Emperor, and his speech is, of course, self-praising, as he has a large audience. The four gods of chaos have come to witness this encounter. They are huge, terrifying, and beautiful. As Horus addresses his father, he becomes increasingly frustrated, as not only does the Emperor's custodian keep interrupting, demanding that Horus surrender, but the Emperor himself does not seem to be paying attention to what Horus is saying. He only repeats the same phrases. "You have killed my son, and why?" Horus does not understand why the Emperor is saying those things to him, but then he realizes that the Emperor is not talking to him, but to the gods of chaos. At that moment, Horus understands that his father may consider him dead. Horus can no longer control his anger and decides to give his father a sample of his new power with a single shot. He speaks beyond Horus, to the gods of chaos. At that moment, Horus understands that his father considers him dead. Horus can no longer control his anger and decides to give his father a sample of his new power with a single blow. The former master of humanity deceives the gods, who approve in the theatrical galleries of the court. The old foes observe and laugh. The Emperor cannot move. He is immobilized by a slow death by incineration. He refuses to scream or express his pain. Not to give Horus that satisfaction, but he cannot move, only writhe and convulse. He cannot move, but Cudas can, driven by pain, rage, and despair. The proconsul comes out of his trance and lunges at Horus. The projectiles from his bolter are fired from the mound of his paragon spear and detonate against the first thigh and hip they find. A moment later, the weapon's sword swings deftly and strikes. Horus turns, surprised by Han's attack. His axes and thrusts propel his spear against the serpent scales. Horus shifts his mold to apply the blade of his weapon, which swings masterfully, striking an instant later. Horus turns, surprised by Han's attack. Kaut stabs and pushes him, driving the spear against the serpent scales. Horus shifts his mole to push his attacker away and continues to pour energy into his father's body. He is not finished. He will not allow them to interrupt him. Then, Mornet attacks the first one he finds from another angle, adding his borrowed sword to the brave efforts of the proconsul. Horus roars. His rage shakes the psychofractal darkness of the court, but he continues to burn power against his father. Then, Rubio seeks Starbright with the will of the Emperor and also pierces him. Lon does not hesitate. His gauntlet, still red with the angel's blood, cuts the plate to his father. Each blow a mortal blow, each blow a lethal blow, each blow reigning over the War Master. Each of the three would be a conquering blow on any other day, the blow of a master warrior that would knock down and kill any opponent, except that this opponent has already passed from death, is immortal and impossible to kill. The undivided power of chaos has immunized him against mortal damage and what does not. Kill him simply enrages him. But the three swords land. It is not the damage that bothers Horus, nor the wounds. The wounds are nothing to him. It is not the edge of the Paragon spear, nor the cutting force of Noel, not even the frosted kiss of the Rubio's sword. It is the vision of his own son turning against him. Gavio, without remorse, without reservations, without moderation, without respect for fatherhood or lineage or a love that was once given and returned. Lon has faced him with a look in his cold gray eyes that Horus has known for a long time. A look that means he has no other purpose than to kill. A look that all of Lon's enemies, Land's enemies, over the years have seen briefly. Horus never thought that look would affect him, but it seems to hurt him more than anything the gods have ever done to him. And the gods, the four ancient ones in their chapel wrapped in veils, stir and lean forward. They watch eagerly. Fathers and sons, agnatic loyalties, connections so complex always provide the most exquisite sport. Horus roars again. The evil energy that springs from his claw ceases. Forgetting his prey, he turns to Lon. Now it is Land's turn to see and feel the look. The focused and bloody gaze of the Lupul War Master, who has illuminated wells and overthrown empires. Those eyes of terror do it. Logan spits, "Show me what you have become." Horus does not need encouragement, nor does he have remorse. He opens his claws to turn the power against his son and punish the insolence of an ungrateful child. The lightning arrives. Lon does not flinch, but Lu moves and hits Lon out of his way, and K2's moves, nailing his spear's blade against the claw to deflect the blow. The arc of power turns white. It burns Lon and El as it passes over them, gilding the flesh inside their plates. It opens a deep, molten ditch in the court floor, the infinite architecture of the War Master's sanctuary. It trembles and moves to repair its sepulchral form. Horus lunges forward. Kuda hits him again on the right. The War Master crushes him aside, determined to reach his son. The proconsul falls like a discarded toy, with the Presidium shield shattered and the Aquilon plate broken. Lon stands up while El finds his, turning to face his father. The War Master is an avalanche of darkness swooping down, the claws rising with power to roast his son to ashes. Lightning envelopes Lon and El, but neither dies. They remain standing, consumed by hatred and power. The Black Night and the warp flow crackle around them with absolute vehemence, but they are kept at bay. Horus lowers his hand, and the rays cease. He turns to the Emperor, who lowers his hand and dissolves the mental shield that prevented the imitation of his two warriors. He is standing, with a golden breastplate scorched and the cape charred. Red blood runs slowly down his nose and the corners of his lips. His war sword rises in his hand, and an asterism of white light shines like a rising sun behind his crowned head. He moves towards his son with the lustral wrath of a supernova. Horus comes to meet him with the atrocious hunger of a black hole. They collide. Each blow lands simultaneously. The ignescent collision shakes the world. Pieces of marble and broken buttresses rain down from the trembling ceiling. They break and shatter like porcelain. The high windows of the court burst into a rain of colored crystals, letting in the red glow of the warp and allowing a dizzying view of the terror. Below, the old force squeals, alarmed, and then applauds. Father and son, this is now between them. In that sequence, it's very clear how powerful Horus Lapaka is in comparison to his father. The champion of chaos is able to knock down the emperor with a single blow and repeats this feat several times throughout the battle. Furthermore, despite being some of the empire's greatest warriors, Lulone and County's Dusk pose a minimal threat to Horus. For me, this raises a crucial question. Why was it previously said that the Emperor of Humanity needed these warriors? L, in particular, is undoubtedly an atypical case. Lon is someone I can see the Emperor wanting in that room. Given that the Emperor faces both a physical and metaphysical disadvantage against his son, he could seek some kind of psychological advantage, and Locan offers him exactly that. Lan's refusal, the Emperor's favorite son, to join Horus in the rebellion, deeply hurts Horus towards his former captain, who remained loyal to the Emperor, could give the Master of Humanity the psychological advantage he needs in this confrontation. In addition to Lon, the presence of the custodian County's Dusk really affects Horus. It is said that the Emperor loved the custodians as much as any of his sons, which is a strange statement, given that the Primarchs were actually his sons, and the Emperor could be a difficult father to them, to put it mildly. Not only will Horus feel some resentment for this, but it is also known that the Emperor speaks through his custodians on occasion, so Dusk's voice is not always his own. Every time Dusk opens his mouth, the Warm One has the feeling that his father refuses to address him properly and instead speaks through a representative. The Primarch's anger is evident because every time the proconsul speaks, Horus hisses at him to shut up. The Space Marine L, on the other hand, would not bother Horus at all. Horus has no idea who L is. He does not recognize this Space Marine. He has no idea about this part of the Primarch project. He might have suspected it, but he never had any confirmation that these prototypes had been manufactured for the Space Marines, and yet the Emperor needed L in the Lippel court. One thing to keep in mind, perhaps when the great angel died at the hands of his brother, many in terror and beyond, including the Emperor of Humanity, felt that if the Emperor understood that his son had perished and that someone would have to protect his body when the Emperor and Horus collided, the energies shattered the physicality. The explosion sent El Locan and County's Dusk flying in different directions, to different realities. Fortunately, when El gets up, he is still in the court and can see the epic jewel, but unfortunately, he will not be of any help there. He knows that there is very little he can do, but he will do whatever it takes. He promised his lover, and such promises are binding. El has never made a formal oath like those made by the estates that preceded him. His promise to order was more personal, more powerful. He has M in his hands and looks around. He sees a fight in which he cannot participate. The Emperor and Horus are fighting only 30 meters away. El has never seen such power and has never seen such skill, not once in his life. The Emperor, surrounded by a golden halo, attacks with claws and swords, switching from one weapon to another and combining both, a masterful lesson in combat technique. Although the weapons, the huge war sword and the tearing claw, are heavy and brutal instruments designed for hand-to-hand combat and to cause maximum damage, the Emperor wields them with the lightness and precision of a violist. Dagger lunges and spins, blocking, cutting, and stabbing, using both with dazzling precision and elegance. His movements remind El of the Eldar dancers he saw once when accompanying his lover on an inexplicable trip. They are the sequences of the sacred mask, an expression of absolute war as art. Horus, a luxuriant war abomination that seems almost twice the emperor's size. He is armed in an even cruder way. His talent is immense industrial pincers that spew steam through their pneumatic valves, and his maul is forged to do nothing but hit and break. But El can hardly believe what he sees. The Lupal behemoth is fluid and agile despite its atrocious mass. Such is his power that Horus equals his adversary in refinement and skill, even matching his blows and parries. They are not mere senseless power. They are subtle, surgical, intuitive. Over the years, El has heard a lot about the battle prowess of the Lupak CA and has never doubted that Horus is a good warrior, since only a good warrior could have been anointed war master, but he has treated the extravagant stories about his talent and skill with caution. They were not exaggerations, not even now, burdened by the weight of incarnate chaos, wrapped in the warp, distorted into such a horrible and bestial form that El can hardly bear to look. Horus is also a master. His method is sublime. He uses the mole and claws with a disconcerting genius. Each movement is lightning fast, each blow calculated with a dozen movements ahead, and none of them are predictable. And then there is the speed, the inhuman speed with which they spin and flow through the track. The two are little more than blurry spots for him. El's transhuman perception struggles to follow them or follow the hyper-fast dialogue of the weapons. They move so fast that there's an almost constant concussion, as the air moves violently every time El makes a tentative move towards them. They have moved away again, spinning at a speed that El knows he cannot match. Joining the fight is like trying to board a moving vehicle. He tries again, but seems almost static next to them. He chases them to a colonnade, but all he finds there are broken stones and fragments of rubble, where their weapons have torn pieces from the walls or knocked down arches that look like young trees. They are already behind him. He turns and is almost trampled as they pass. It is impossible to face them. They are fighting at a different speed, at the peak of their reflexes. El cannot hope to synchronize with them long enough to land a blow, and, if he tried, he would be pulverized like driftwood in a millisecond. He contemplates with awe. He understands the paralyzing fear that humans feel when they contemplate the Astartes in combat. He lowers his sword, impotent, useless. He is a solitary observer of the titanic fight, an intruder, a surplus, an accidental spectator who has stumbled onto the stage from the backstage, but who has no role to play and knows none of the cues. The feeling of helplessness is agonizing. This spectacle will decide the fate of a species, but he can only watch, enraged, consumed by frustration. El looks for the others, but there is no trace of the Luna Wolf, Lon, or the proud guardian, proconsul, anywhere in the court. Have they already tried what he is trying? Have they thrown themselves into the fight and been reduced to stains, shattered by the fury of the contending gods? The attention between father and son is so intense that El doubts that either of them has noticed who they are crushing underfoot. The court is no longer the dark cathedral that El entered next to the emperor. Now he sees that the infinite architecture of the first temple of ruins must have been shattered by the force of the initial explosion. El wonders if the disappearance of the terrible infinite architecture is a promise of hope. The Lupak court was a palace of terror created by the warp to terrorize and intimidate the first visitors. If Lupaka has suspended it to divert power to its members, that suggests that its power is finite.